Good evening. Hello, I'm Diane Crowley. Welcome to our last in a series of From Ballots to Better Health series. I welcome you here tonight. As part of my work at this Boston University, excuse me, my allergies are very terrible today. I apologize for everybody who can put up with me. As part of my work at Boston University School of Social Work, I oversee BUSSW Votes, which is a collaborative effort of students, faculty, and staff facilitating voter registration, advocating for voting rights, and ensuring a safe voting community for all of our school community. Before we begin our program this evening, I'd like to begin by offering a land acknowledgement. The land which BU occupies was once the home of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people who stewarded the land and prospered from her gifts. These peoples were forcibly removed and enslaved through colonial acts of terror perpetuated by white settlers from nations seeking to extract and exploit the gifts of Mother Earth and the labor of her stewards. The deleterious effects of these acts have impacted generations of people and the land itself. Patterns of violent oppression fueled racial capitalism will persist until we address the root causes. Neither the planet nor its people will find peace. As social workers, we have a moral obligation to name injustices, to resist oppressive structures, and to build relationships that catalyze the collective action. We are very excited that you've joined us tonight. BUSSW Votes is proud to co-sponsor this event with the Center for Innovation, Social Work, and Health. The goal of this series, and this is, as I mentioned, is the final in the series, is to help social work professionals, leaders, and students learn how to effectively engage in elections and ballot initiatives to preserve democracy and strengthen our to preserve democracy and to advocate for policies that we care about as social workers. We would like to underscore the importance of adhering to the NASW Code of Ethics, particularly Principle 6 regarding social workers' ethical responsibilities to the broader society. This principle emphasizes social and political action to guarantee equal access to resources, services, and opportunities necessary for individuals to meet their basic needs and fully thrive. Social workers are encouraged to advocate for policies and legislative changes that address social inequities. We're excited for tonight's program, Agents of Change, Social Workers Fighting Against Dark Money in Politics. And during tonight's program, you'll hear from two national social work experts. But first, a few housekeeping items before we begin. We are recording and we will share the recording on our website. If you do not want your video shared, please turn off your video. To see speakers and slides, we have set the Zoom to spotlight for the best user experience. Please let us know if you have any accessibility issues and email CISWH@bu.edu. To turn on closed caption, go to the Zoom toolbar and click on the icon rounded below. And a few additional housekeeping items. Please watch the chat for links to resources that we'll post throughout the presentation. And please use the Q&A function for questions. Questions will not be anonymous. Will not be anonymous, and questions will be sent only to hosts and co-hosts who will read them. We will provide 1 CE to those who complete the post-event quiz within 14 days and earn at least a 70%. And we ask that you adhere to our nonpartisan statement of participation shared previously. Thank you. And I will then turn our presentation over to Tami to begin the program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for kicking us off in this third series tonight. Welcome, everybody. I am Tami Gouveia. I'm the director of the Center for Innovation in Social Work and Health at the Boston University School of Social Work. And just want to share briefly that the center supercharges innovation in social work research, training, education, and practice in order to really elevate the role of social workers alongside community and to build power and influence on the political agenda for health equity around the world. So we're excited that you're here tonight to hear from two folks who have been deeply embedded in the field of social work throughout their careers and who are here to share their experiences, not necessarily only as one is a social worker, one is not, but you'll hear from them their experiences about running for office, how to decide whether or not to run for office, some of the steps to running for office, what it's like as a social worker or as the leader of an entity that endorses social work candidates, what that work looks like. And then we're also going to touch on ranked choice voting. So super excited for the conversation that we're going to have here tonight. It's going to be more a salon style conversation. We're not going to do big PowerPoint presentations, and we'll have plenty of time for your questions towards the end of the event. So first, I'd like to introduce Ayesha M. Wilson. Councilor Wilson serves on the Cambridge City Council. She is a mom and a product of Cambridge Public Schools and public housing, and she is committed to serving the youth of Cambridge. Her experiences led her to become a social worker and to serve 2 terms on the Cambridge School Committee. Councilor Wilson advocates for the needs of the Black and Brown community, including affordable housing and childcare for individuals and families, mental health resources, youth mentorship, and childhood literacy. Rebekah Gewirtz she directs the Massachusetts and the Rhode Island chapters of the National Association of Social Workers. They just had a fantastic symposium that they held last Thursday and Friday. It was fully virtual, 800 social workers from around the country. So kudos to you, Rebekah, and your team for a great effort that you put on last week. And so honored that just a couple days later, you're here with us tonight. Previously, Rebekah served for more than 8 years as the Director of Government Relations and Political Action at NASW, and also served as the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Public Health Association. Her work with NASW, Mass, and Rhode Island includes successful efforts to advance social work practice through policy, including legislation protecting social workers from frivolous lawsuits and restricted covenants, passing legislation granting social workers Section 12 authority and improved safety in the workplace, and leading the chapter's political action arm, NASW Mass PACE, working with members to endorse and support candidates throughout Massachusetts who share social work values and priorities. Rebekah also served as an alderman in the city of Somerville. So first, let's turn our first question over to Councilor Ayesha M. Wilson. Thank you again for being here. So you and I had a chance to talk maybe about a month and a half ago, and I learned so much about you in that very brief conversation that we had for about, 30 minutes. I knew of you from when I ran for lieutenant governor. That's where we first met each other and realized, wow, we're social workers in this space, running for office, trying to create change. But I'm wondering, from your perspective and your experience and the leadership positions that you've held, what it's been like for you to take those leadership skills very seriously, kind of not just about political leadership, but leadership really writ large. And what are the values and the skills that you have brought forward as a social worker when deciding to run and serve in elected office?
Yes, thank you, Tami, and thank you so much to the center for doing this work and bringing these voices together. Social workers in roles of government and in leadership, it truly do matter. And for me, it's also about representation. I think about my role right now as a city councilor in Cambridge, being the 3rd Black woman to hold this seat and the 4th woman of color. What I think about in terms of overall how this plays out in our city is just making sure that we're listening to voices and that we are centering voices that are not often the loudest, not often the ones who are showing up in the spaces, council meetings, and they're not those people, right? We really need to find and meet our neighbors and reach out to our constituents where they are. And so that's going to the housing developments, that's going to our senior buildings, and that's really, talking to small business owners. And I do take that seriously. And that's something that for me, being able to serve not only on the school committee, where it was really centering the needs of our young people. And again, you all said it in my bio, I'm a product of Cambridge Housing Authority, as well as Cambridge Public Schools. So this is really near and dear to my heart in terms of how we look at equity in education, how do we look at the well-being in our academic learning spaces for our young people, but specifically kids of color and kids with special learning needs. And so I knew that my voice and my leadership could really bring change and bring a wealth of diverse conversations to the table, especially because of my youth experience, and being that I worked with young people for the over 20 years. So it's not by accident that some of the things that I was able to do, you know, and push for, especially more social workers in our schools, really centering the needs around mental health and wellness and social emotional learning, that those things really help to bring my leadership up to kind of where it is today, and really advocating for those who are feel most powerless. And I always love to center our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, when she says, bringing those closest to the pain, closest to the power. You know, and it's really important that we're opening those doors and continuing to create pathways so that our most vulnerable communities have feel like their voices can get heard.
Yeah, I really love how you've elevated what it means to be a social worker in elected office, and raising the voices of historically marginalized, excluded populations. And as you so aptly put it, you know, one of the quotes that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is known for is exactly what you just said, that people who have the greatest pain need to be closest to the power. Rebekah, turning to you for a little bit. So you have been in leadership positions at NASW and PHA. You've served in elected office. Wondering what your experience has been and what your observations of social work leadership has really meant, and what you've observed throughout your career. And I've known you for a lot longer than I've known Councilor Wilson. So we didn't need to have like a separate get together just to kind of get to know each other. But, you know, so I've sort of watched you throughout your career, and I really see you as a leader. So wondering what your take is on this question.
Yeah, thanks, Tami, and thanks for having me tonight. And I feel so privileged to be in this space, and certainly here with Councilor Wilson, who is someone that NASW Mass PACE, our political action arm, has endorsed, I believe more than one time. 5 times.
5 times?
3 times.
3 times. Amazing. Yeah. I love it.
Super proud of that. So on the local level, NASW PACE endorses social workers who are running for office who share our values. On the state level, the political action arm endorses all candidates who share social work values, regardless of whether or not they're a social worker or not. We do that because our work is largely on the state level, and we're doing advocacy with legislators on the state level. Our work does not tend to be on the local level, but we recognize the importance of building a pipeline of social workers in elected office, social workers who share our values, who are working for issues of social and economic justice and for the advancement of the profession, who will then go on, hopefully, to, if they want to continue higher and higher in leadership roles, potentially in state government or federal government or what have you, or perhaps they just, you know, they continue to stay at the local level, which is critically important. I will say, when I ran for office all the way back in 2005, I would say to people, they'd be like, "Why are you running? It's, you know, why would you do that?" And I was like, well, you've got to pick up the mirror and ask yourself, why not me? You know, why not? Why shouldn't I run? I have these values that I think are simpatico with my community, and I think that it would be important to try to bring this perspective. At that time, it was called a Board of Aldermen, to the Board of Aldermen. And so that's how we feel about getting social workers engaged and further empowered through elected office at the local level, and then, you know, again, onward to potentially to the state level. So I guess in order to directly also address your question, Tami, about the role of social workers in public office, social workers come with such a unique set of skills and experience and knowledge. So social workers are trained in family systems. Social workers are that rare group of people who decided, we're going to create a professional association. It's going to be NASW, and it's going to have a 2-pronged mission. It is not sort of simply going to advocate for the profession and licensure and things like that. That's going to be one important prong, but the other equally important prong is going to be advocacy for issues of social, economic, and racial justice. that are issues that are critically important to the clients and communities served by and served with social workers. So social workers bring this point of view, they bring this perspective, and they're often people who are thinking of upstream, who are thinking about, well, maybe these problems that we're seeing in society aren't the result of an individual person's failings, but the circumstances in which they live or they have grown up, or the policies that we've made that have caused these situations to occur. Poverty is a really great example. You know, we have long worked on issues of addressing economic inequality and issues of poverty, because when you grow up in poverty, your chances are so much more limited. You have higher risks for all the things, you know, that can lead to poor health outcomes, both physical and mental health. So social workers recognize, and through their professional association, charge us to go and do that work to address those problems upstream.
Yeah, and I remember when I was in the legislature as a state representative, I saw you a lot at the State House with lift the cap on kids related to deep childhood poverty. Really important, critical work that social workers. It's just one of many examples, the ways that you and others at NASW and other organizations have really been leading on. And I will say, when I first ran for a state representative, NASW was the first place I went, and it was the first endorsement that I received was NASW PACE, which I was so proud to have and excited to have, because it gave me that level of credibility as a social worker. And I had similar experiences where people would say, why do you want to leave public health? Why do you want to leave social work to go into the legislature? And I think it's the same thing that you probably get similar questions, Councilor Wilson, you know, why do you want to do this? Like, why do you want to leave your field? And I have to remind people and sort of shift the thinking that this is just the place where we are doing social work practice. Political social work is a real field unto itself that has real critical importance. And so just wondering, you know, you both ran for office, you both served in elected office. What contributed to deciding why to run for office? How did you have the conversation with family and friends? Did you need to be asked multiple times to run for office? Or did you just feel it in your gut, like, this is something I need to do and I'm going to go for it, even if I don't look like the mold of most other elected officials? Councilor Wilson,
Yes.
you want to start?
Sure.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And, you know, it was the first running for school committee wasn't that challenging. You know, I was supporting an individual who was running for city council. This was in 2017, Richard Harding. He was on the school committee. He was running for council. And I remember knocking doors, and this was my first time ever getting involved in a political campaign. And as I'm knocking doors and I'm talking about him, and he's a kid from Cambridge, worked in our youth centers and doing all this great work. And he's a Black man. And I was just like, whoa, I'm talking all these great things about him. And I'm like, I could be talking about myself here. Like, how come? And I pinched him and was like, why didn't you tell me to run for your seat? You know? Because I truly feel like I could have made a difference, you know, in that year, 2017. And I remember on election day that year of 2017, former mayor of Cambridge and state rep Alice Wolf, the late Alice Wolf, she said to me, why isn't your name on that sign? And I said, well, maybe in 2 years it will be. And she immediately said to me, you need to join the Emerge program. You need to learn about running for office. You need to learn, you know, everything, the whole A to Z. And so I looked into Emerge. I joined the class of 2017, which had some amazing rock stars in that class, from Samantha Pearlman in Marlboro to Julia Mejia in Boston to other women, great women across our state. And so Emerge really taught me a lot about how to run, what's the A to Z, building your team, all those good things that we will talk a little bit more about. But running for city council, that was a different story. So I served 2 terms in Cambridge on the school committee, right? My first 3 months, the pandemic hit. It was a lot of COVID, it was a lot of pandemic, you know, learning epidemiology, all these good things that in order to keep folks safe, in order to think about what we need to do, vaccine mandates, all of these tough conversations, but really looking at the equity issues across education and academics across the board, especially for children with special needs, was huge. But making sure that folks were safe and that folks had also digital access during that time. but running for council was a different beast. I had just had a baby who was just under a year old. And I remember coming back from Jamaica, actually, this was like Memorial Day weekend, and I was visiting family in Jamaica, and I get a call from our state rep, Marjorie Decker, who says, my state rep, who says, hey, there are 3 open seats right now. You need, oh, no. At that time, I think there might've been two open seats that we knew of, right? And maybe one was being whispered and rumored about. So there's gonna be these open seats. I think you need to run. And I just said, oh, Marjorie, I can't run. I don't think I can do it. This is going to be a lot. Our city, Cambridge, is so complex. Everybody's at large. We have the ranked choice voting, which we will talk more about. And I just said, I would have to talk to my family. I have this new baby. I'm in this, I don't want to say I'm never comfortable in anything, but like in school committee, if you got reelected already, you kind of feel like you're a little safe. You still got to knock doors and reach out to constituents, but maybe you don't have to knock that many doors and you don't have to make that many phone calls. And especially with a young child, that was something I was keeping in mind. But running for council, I knew I would have to be on the doors every night, making those calls, fundraising, which I was a public employee working for the housing authority, so I had that huge barrier and couldn't make the ask myself. So raising funds was going to be hard. Building a team that I wasn't sure how to pay if I couldn't raise funds and all this stuff was going to be difficult. And I just had to go to my family and just say, I'm going to need you all. This is the time that if there's ever a time that I need to run and be in this seat, it is now, where we have 3 open seats. And while, in Cambridge, all seats could be contested because we're all at large. But when there are 3 folks who are not seeking re-election, we know that this is a critical and valuable and vulnerable and most influential time, if not for anything else, to get into that seat. And again, as I said in my opening, being the 3rd Black woman, levels of representation in our city really, truly matter. And those voices need to be more centered. Women in office, social worker in office, Black women who grew up in our community in office. So I just felt like I had to do this, and not only could I do this with my family support to really support me and my baby during that time, where my mom has him now as I'm on this call with you all, so family truly is the pillar in the community. It's truly a pillar in me being able to make these large decisions and represent and lead in my city. So I'm really grateful to that.
I love all of that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And you touched on so many of like the key things that you need to run an effective campaign. We'll loop back to some of those, like knocking on doors and a fundraising plan and staffing. But we'll come back to that. Rebekah, what about you? What was sort of your pathway to running for office, and what did your conversations with family and friends?
Yeah, so I was quite young at the time, and I had founded a group called the Progressive Democrats of Somerville. We had come off a really successful effort to get Robert Reich on the ballot and in Somerville to organize people to go to the convention and support him. And he won Somerville as a result of our efforts. It was really a ground operation, and really, really successful. And then after that, we decided we wanted to keep organizing as a group. So we decided that we were going to we were frustrated that the legislature, the Democrats in particular, had this really progressive party platform, but completely defied the party platform. Like there was people who had no commonality with the party platform who were saying they were Democrats just to be able to get elected. So we said, you know what, there should be a scorecard. And the Democratic Party should do it themselves, and from inside the party. So we weren't people who were like, we're in the Green Party and we were of the Democratic Party. And we were like, the party should do it themselves. So we organized an effort to get the scorecard initiative passed the Democratic State Convention. And it was quite an effort. And I remember at one of our organizing meetings when we were just about there with all the details and what it would look like. And someone came in and said, it was around the time of the Iraq War. And they said, if you're not speaking out about the Iraq War, then you're not a progressive group. And we all kind of said, wait a minute, we're here for a purpose. we agreed together that our purpose was going to be to push for this resolution at the state convention. So we're happy to have other folks do the things that they want to do also at the convention, but we really want to stay focused on the reason we came together and our process for coming to the decision that this is what we wanted to do. And I think part of our success was that discipline, and figuring out what is our message going to be and sticking with our message. And we had buttons, we had all the things. We needed like 1,000 signatures and we got 2,000 or something, and got to the floor of the convention hall, and it had to go to a standing vote whether or not it should be done. And it was like by a 60-40 standing vote, we won. And I remember Robert Reich came like running up to me. He was like, "You did it. We did it." And it was this feeling of like this intractable old boys kind of party, like moved. The highest governing authority of the Democratic Party is the convention. A lot of people don't know that, or maybe are, because you got to kind of dig into the rules and stuff. And the convention said, this is what we're going to do. And so I like left there on cloud nine. I was like, oh my God, we can do anything. A whole other story for a whole other day is what happened later and how stymied we were in actually getting it done within the party, and how many meetings I was at where there were barriers put up here, there, and everywhere about how the real problem is the Republicans. We need to be focusing on the Republicans, and why are you trying to harm the Democratic Party? And it's like, no, we're trying to make the Democratic Party be for what it is, what it says it's going to stand for. And by the way, the convention voted for, you have to do it. And they would not do it. So we pushed, we ended up doing it ourselves. Me and one of our tech guys, we spent hours like going through we had it up for a while. It fell off after a certain period of time, but that experience of both winning at the convention and with the Robert Reich campaign, and recognizing that it doesn't, like Margaret Mead said, it takes a small group of committed people to change the world. She said, indeed, that's the only thing that ever has. And I got really motivated. I was like, well, look at our Board of Aldermen in Somerville. I read this book called The Right Nation, and it was how the right had built all this power by getting people elected to school committees and city councils and town councils. And from there, they built up this huge apparatus, to be able to get George Bush elected, and then head us down these paths to war and these problems. So we needed to take a page out of their playbook. So we had an alderman in my neighborhood. It was Davis Square, and he did not support our efforts. And I was like, I'm going to run. And my thought was like, it's not so much about against him. And then people tried to paint it as old versus new, and the new guard trying to take out the old. I was like, no, this is about like, what do we want? What do we want to, how do we want to, who do we want to represent us? That's going to stand up for the things that we believe in. And so people would ask me at the door, why are you running against him? I'd be like, I'm not here to talk about him. Like, I'm here to talk about the issues and the things that matter and the things that maybe matter to you. And through that effort and lots and lots and lots and lots of door knocking and a great campaign and so many volunteers. I mean, I always joke that like, if you were in Vegas, you were not betting on me. I was, this was a different time in Somerville, everybody was an old dude on the Board of Aldermen, like big time, and almost to a person. And there was not a lot of appetite in the like quote unquote old school for like a new perspective. But I do think part of the reason why I ultimately won that election is because I was so committed to, this isn't about us versus them. This isn't about we're the new and we hate the old and we're going to, because most of the people who vote in local municipal elections are people who've been there a long, long time and are like they want to see who's going to look out for their interests. They're not interested in that. In fact, they're opposed to that kind of thing. So that wasn't the reason. That was my point of view, because that's my deeply held personal belief regardless. But it was important to be able to convey that. And I actually think there's a lesson in that to learn today, that right now I have seen divisiveness on a level that I have never seen before in my entire life and my entire career. And frankly, it scares me. It frightens me when I see this. I see people hating other people, tearing them down, not looking at each other with compassion. And frankly, I see it on the left and I don't like it. And it's scary to stand up on the left and say, I don't like that. Don't do that. Because maybe it feels like you're not being part of the movement or something. But I think it's incumbent on us to say, wait a minute, are we leading with compassion? Are we looking at other human beings as human beings? The only way, and I come back to NASW, that I've had any success as a lobbyist, if I've had any success at all, is because I don't burn bridges and I try to find common ground. There are people who are dead set against us on certain issues, but are best friends on others. And I want them on those other issues, right? I want those best friends. There was one Republican that was in the House for many, many years, always against us on issues of welfare, on issues of, the minimum wage, on some core stuff that we deeply cared about that's critically important. But when it came to loan forgiveness for social workers or social work safety in the workplace, he was our leading guy. So I don't mean to take too much time, and I'll step back a little bit now from my proverbial soapbox here, but just to say that I ran in a time where it was, young women didn't do that. I'll say one more thing about it. The guy I was running against said in both local papers, well, she's younger and better looking than I am, so I should probably take her seriously. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't. They
How
would
old were
never
you?
do that to a
Wow.
man. They would never.
No, not at all.
It was,
No.
so it was really real, that stuff. And I didn't let it stop me. I wasn't going to let that stop me. In fact, it motivated me, but it also didn't make me hate him. I didn't say, oh, I hate him. He's, my feeling was like, I'm going to show him. I'm going to show him that standing forth with values and doing the hard work and knocking on doors. And I followed up with every person I knocked on their door, got a handwritten note from me later saying it was so nice to meet you and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And that's how you win elections. And I feel like that's how I won that election, for sure.
If I can just
Yeah,
jump
and
in and add, and Rebekah, I think exactly what you're talking about there, and really doing that groundwork, the grassroots, the organizing, and just going door to door and meeting with residents. And as you're even talking to folks, you might be in a different place on a specific topic, but maybe not all the topics, right? That's happening in our cities. And, Cambridge, again, being the People's Republic, and we just have so much divisiveness right now, whether we're talking about affordable housing, whether we're talking about bike lanes, and it's a hard pill to swallow across our city, because I don't support, or, we just had a very contentious vote on Monday about extending the timeline on our bike lane infrastructure. And because I was a supporter of that, because I'm thinking about our small businesses, I'm thinking about our residents who live in low-income housing, I'm thinking about our elderly neighbors and our neighbors with disabilities who, have the moving of the handicap spots, or whatever the case is, like those needs still matter too, right? And it's like, it's very much in our city right now, it's an either or conversation where I'm trying to move it to the both end. How can we're not going to be 100% happy with the decisions that are being made. That doesn't mean that I hate bikers. That doesn't mean that I don't want safety for our students and our kids who are riding their bikes to and from, because I do. And I also recognize that there are other individuals across our cities and business owners who are relying on the parking spots and who need, the delivery drivers to be able to pull up and unload and load and do all those things as well. And so it's very contentious. And, we're seeing it not only in Boston, Somerville has the challenges, Boston, and everything, but Cambridge, you know, I just wish that we all can do better around these conversations, and that we can always see the both and not just the me. I need my needs met only, screw everybody else, me. So it's really, and I think with the social worker lens and value, I really think about the compromise and how to bring both sides to the table and try to find that happy medium. And it's not happy because, again, we're talking about safety. We're talking about people having safe passages, you know, to and from. And we recognize that there are individuals who still have cars and who still, you know, rely on, you know, just accessibility in that way too. And that's a quality of life issue as well. So I thank you for bringing that up. And I just really wanted to throw that in around the divisiveness and just how it's hard balancing those things in elected office. And when I was on the school committee, it was about the vaccines and the vaccine mandates. And do we mandate? Do we not? What does it look like? Are we masking? Are we not? You know, it's always going to be something. I want to keep that real with folks. Like, it will always be something, but the important thing, and especially as social workers, that we try to hear both sides. We don't jump into the fold where it's an either or, but we are trying to figure out what is the compromise, what is the happy medium, how do we bring people along in the conversation, because that's what truly does matter, especially around democracy. Thank you, Tami.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think, Tami,
Go ahead, Rebekah.
I just
Yeah,
love what you just said, Councilor Wilson, and hearing that. And I feel like we need to speak out in more settings like this about this, because it is tearing us down. It is, the left is imperiled by this. You don't agree with me, you're a bad person. When did that happen?
But like, you love me on universal after school. You love me on my conversations around housing. You love me, you know.
Right.
It's a hard...
But now you're calling me a bad person. So I'm like, we're not going to work on stuff together. Like, we're alienated from each other. It's over when you start getting into that sort of space. And it's so prevalent. And
this is where I'm channeling Michelle Obama. When they go low, you go high. You know, you just try to maintain that level of highness of like, I get it. Everybody's not going to love me. Right. But how can but I also have to stay true to myself in this work and true to other constituents in our communities who may not be the ones who come out to public comment and may not testify via, you know, the emails, right? Like, that's not their thing. So yeah, thank you.
I love this conversation. This is exactly why we decided at the center to partner with BUSSW Votes to pull together this series, because the first session we focused a lot, and Vanessa Navarro, who's here with us, a student at the BU School of Social Work, who will be helping facilitate questions in a little bit. She presented on why voting matters for social determinants of health, like why voting matters for social workers. And we are hearing, you know, from a number of places across the country that a lot of social work students are, you know, social workers are thinking, I might sit this election out. I don't want to vote in this election. And what we're trying to do with this series is identify what the structural issues are with our elections, with our politics. Some of that goes to disinformation, which was also part of that first session back in March. So you can check that video out on our website if you haven't already watched it. And then last week, we had two folks at the national level come and talk about why it's important to get dark money out of our politics. And one of the graphs that was shown was the amount of money that's in our elections right now, and who are the primary donors to our elections are the most polarized. But when you look, and so you can see this sort of like U curve of like left and right, as far as polarization, those are the donor base. Then when you look at your average everyday voter, the curve is the opposite. We're really more, your average voter is more in the middle, but the average voter is getting lost in all of this. And I think that social workers have not only a unique role, but I think it's our responsibility. And I do think our code of ethics and just why we exist really is to start to address those structural issues. Go vote, you know, hold your nose if you have to, because you don't like what the choices are, but then get involved in efforts to overturn Citizens United, get involved in efforts to help get more social workers or more representative candidates elected, more candidates of color elected, help LGBTQ candidates get elected, first gen elected into office, whether it's at the local level or the national level. And people do oftentimes overlook like the critical role that local elected officials play in our everyday lives. And that's why I was so thrilled to bring the two of you here to talk about like, what is it like to serve at that local level? But I want to make sure that we are like leaving some time to get to a little bit more nuts and bolts. So you talked about door knocking. You talked about voter outreach. I did the same exact thing you did, Rebekah. I sent out 1,000 handwritten notes. After every door we knocked on, a person got a handwritten note. It makes all the difference in the world. That's called retail politics. Just another term to sort of throw out there is what we're really good at, which is building relationships, listening to people. We have research skills. We have coalition building skills. We know how to organize our butts off, right? Like those are the real skills that social workers play, plus deep expertise in the things that people need to survive, not only survive, but to really thrive. So wondering about some of the more nuts and bolts, like, do you remember how many doors you knocked on? How did you craft your message? How much money did you raise? How scared were you to raise money? Did you struggle with imposter syndrome? And then Councilor Wilson, I think not everybody listening necessarily knows that as someone who's a state or a municipal employee, what the restrictions are on fundraising. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well. So I throw that big question of the nuts and bolts out to both of you, whoever wants to take it first.
You want to jump in, Rebekah, real quick, and then I'll come in after you.
Sure, no problem. Yeah. How you run your campaign is very important to whether you'll be successful or not. And I had worked on campaigns. I was working for a state rep Pat Jalen. Before she was a senator, she was a rep. Before her, I worked for this guy, Jim Maselli, who was one of the first eye-opening things for me about how you could be a Democrat, but not hold any of the Democratic positions from the party platforms. So it was something that informed me as we were thinking about the scorecard initiative. Such a wonderful, nice guy, though. Like, he couldn't have been kinder to me. I mean, and again, a case in point of like, did we agree on everything? Nope. Did he encourage me to go to the Progressive Legislator Group meetings, because I was jazzed about them? Like, yes. So people would joke there too. They'd be like, oh, is Jim Maselli changing? Is he becoming a progressive? Because I was there, as his aide. He's like, don't let people think that. But anyway, like getting back to the campaign. So to run a successful campaign, you need to have a universe. So, and that's sort of lingo-y terminology, but if you're running an award the way I was, you have to have a good sense of where are the boundaries of the ward, what are the precincts, so there are 3 precincts in my ward, and then who are the super voters, so in municipal elections specifically. And when you're running for municipal election, it's very important because there is a distinction between people who vote at the municipal level and people who vote at the state level. So as I alluded to or mentioned earlier, people who vote at the municipal level, at least when I was running, tended to be older, longer time residents of the city, making them a more difficult constituency to convince or campaign with when you have a different or newer perspective. So you have to figure out who's this group of people. And then I think based on that, you build, you have a data person who can say, okay, we need to touch X number of people because we need X number of votes to be based on how many people turn out in the last couple of elections to be able to win. So you isolate then who are all those people that you need to talk to. And then you set out to talk to all of those people. And the best way to talk to all of those people is to knock on their door and say hello, and to let them know who you are and to let them know why you're running. And importantly, if you hear nothing else, hear this, to listen to them. You really need to listen to people. And I found, interestingly, that one of the things that I enjoyed the most, and that I think people who I knocked on their door appreciated was having somebody stand there who wanted to listen to them, who heard them out, you know? Now, granted, you can't stay at a door for 30 minutes because you won't get through your list, and you've got to make sure you get through your list. But you can be there for a respectful amount of time and engage in conversation with someone and hear them out and take notes on what they're saying and follow up with them. Again, coming back to what Tami said, that's kind of like retail politics, you know, but it's the right thing to do. You're asking people to trust you. You're asking people for their vote. So you should be good for it. You know, you should follow up with them and be committed to what you're saying also that you're going to do. And so then it's really persistence, you know, having volunteers and only knocking on those doors of the people in your universe. There's a great temptation, I think, when campaigning, especially as it gets closer to election day and people are starting to think about, like, do I vote? Like, to just tell everybody to, like, go vote. And that's what, like, get out the vote groups are for, and they're fabulous and they do that, and that's awesome. But your job as a candidate is to make sure you're turning out your ones and twos. So those are all the people who told you either definitely yes, I'm voting for you, or most probably I'm voting for you. Those are all people that have been noted on your clipboard and are inputted into the system, and who, you know, on election day, you're doing door hangers on their doors. You are urging them, and only them, to come out and vote, because you need to reach that certain threshold of voters who you know are going to vote for you in order to win the election. I will tell you one quick funny anecdote. When I was running for the first time in 2005, I had knocked my ward myself 3 times, I think, like a lot of times. So I was on my final pass on this one street, and I go up to the door and I reach out my calloused hand from knocking on doors to knock on this door. And the woman behind the door opens the door before I can even knock. And she's like, look, I get it. Okay. I'm going to vote for you. And that is kind of the moment where, you know, like, I think I'm done here. Like I am saturated, you know, like they get it. They've heard from me a lot, you know. And you know, so it's that, and it's the mailings are really important. It's important to have more than one mailing. You know, you don't want to just have one mailing and then you're done. So if you can't afford it, you have to really try to figure out how to afford it, to have at least 2 mailings with the same messaging in your mailings. And raising money is a thing, you know, it is a thing. My campaign, I think I raised the most money anyone had raised before on the local level in Somerville. I think I raised like $40,000 or something. At the time was like a lot of money. And it was a lot of email. We were doing a ton of email, and that was new back then. There was no Facebook or Snapchat or whatever. It was like email lists, you know, and we would send them out and say, please give. I also went through my phone. I called my family members. I called friends. I called anybody who I thought might want to contribute. And that part's a little harder. You know, it's hard to call people and ask them for money. And at the same time, sometimes people are glad you did. They're like, oh, you're running? Oh, I can help. And this is a way I can help. But if they give $10, like, great, you know, and then they're in and they're involved. So that is hard, but it's essential, and it has to be done in a campaign. And if you have a good campaign manager, which you need to have a campaign manager. You can't run your own campaign. They will tell you your job as a candidate is to knock on doors and raise money. Knock on doors and raise money. If you're doing anything else, you're wasting the precious time of the candidate, of the things that only the candidate can do. Those are just
you want a very qualified, experienced campaign manager. And if you want to have a friend or a family who has skills that are aligned with what you need in a campaign manager, which is someone who will make you sit in that chair and make those phone calls for call time or knock on those doors and talk to voters. There are trainings not only for candidates, but there are trainings for people who want to run campaigns, young people, people who want to have a second career or make a career shift or really want to get involved. There are trainings that are available as well. So Councilor Wilson, let's turn it over to you just to answer this question. And then also we'll talk a little bit about ranked choice voting, because you are in a unique position to have run and won in a system that is very different than what the traditional winner take all system is. So maybe just answer the question of, raising money, knocking doors, and then the ranked choice voting questions.
Sure. Thank you for the question, and Rebekah. I love hearing just how you kind of went about the process. It's really interesting to hear, and it's so different and so similar in many ways. For me, I was a public employee. I used to work with the Cambridge Housing Authority. And so as a public employee, you are like forbidden by law to actually solicit dollars. So you cannot solicit money for a fundraiser for your campaign or for anyone else's on that matter. And so that's the same for educators. So folks who have a state, public job, whatever, they cannot solicit dollars even on your behalf. So I had to be extra cautious. I could never say, hey, Tami, you got me $25 a week? No. I can never do that. So my committee would have to send letters, do the door knocking. Do those asks at fundraisers and different things like that to raise funds. It was definitely something that was nerve-wracking because you never know what you was going to get. And given that I have my network, right, doesn't necessarily come from money, right? I grew up in public housing. So my reach, when I think about my family and my closest friends, it's hard. I think back to my Emerge days, and one of the first classes that we had to create our list of folks that we wanted to call. And I remember my mom being on the list. And so it was like, you start the call. Hey, Mom, how's it going? All right. I'm running a campaign, right? Well, I'm going to hand this phone over to Jen, who's going to, continue this conversation real quick about the campaign and talking to you about things that we need. Jen takes the phone and she's just like, hey, Mom, how you doing? So, Ayesha's running this campaign, and it takes dollars to really make a good campaign be successful. So Ayesha, we're going to ask you today if you can help with about $50 to donate to Ayesha's campaign. Now, this is my mother who's in her 60s, who's on a fixed income, and I know that money is pretty tight, right? And even asking for $50, Jen was on the other line. It wasn't on speakerphone. And Jen just squeezed me as she said, she feels like she hears my mom in her purse right now. And this is making me emotional a little bit, in her purse right then and there, looking for the dollars that she had available to give to the campaign, right? And so when you think about the asking of family members and friends who may not have it, but who do want to help and support the success of your campaign, you got to start digging deep, right? And even if it's $25, if it's $5, whatever it is, right? The watching of my baby is endless in terms of dollar amounts, right? And so friends can help out in a number of different ways. My sisters, they were out on those doors helping, and that's critically important, right? And so making sure I did not have paid staff because I really couldn't afford to pay staff. In my school committee races, I was lucky to raise about $12,000 or $15,000, right? And again, because I had this barrier attached to me that it made it so difficult to ask for money. I never had actual staff. I had campaign managers who were volunteers, and I had a host of advisors. I had a great kitchen cabinet, but no one was an actual dedicated campaign manager for me. So I did run my own campaign, and it was probably the hardest thing, especially for a city council race like Cambridge, where everyone's at large and we have this ranked choice that I'll get to in just a moment. But what it did take is a lot of persistence, and it did take me getting out there and talking to our neighbors and making sure that folks understand my value, my skill set, and being as real as I can with them about why me. And that was part of the pitch that I had to always come back to, is just why me, not worrying about anybody else, but also naming that we are in a critical moment in our city. We're seeing the changes times 1,000 is happening rapidly right before our eyes. And if we want to really, it's our city council who really does have a lot of voice and choice. And so it's important that you're choosing city councilors whose visions and missions align a bit with yours and things that you can really stand behind and want to support. And then when you get that number one, or, that possible number two, then you say, hey, how else can you help me? Can you please spread the word? Can you host that yard sign? Might you introduce me to a few more of your neighbors and host a little coffee hour or something like that? And so it's a lot of that I was able to do, was get other people to buy into the campaign, to want to support me and want to see the success. And that's what really grew us to be successful. This isn't easy. I want to keep it very real with everybody. Running a campaign is not easy, but guess what? When you have heart, when you're driven, and you can have folks behind you who do truly value where you are and where you're coming from, and see where you're going, and for the betterment of your community, that's all that you need to really be successful. And so I feel like my story is not one that I would say, do it like me. Please don't. Have a team. Make sure you have campaign managers. Find the money. Make it happen. But I wasn't in a position where I can quit my job, right? I wasn't in a position where I could, ask mommy and daddy for a loan. I just wasn't in those financial positions. I have a small child. I'm paying for childcare. I am, working. I'm doing a lot, but I have to. So it wasn't really this privilege and luxury of having it any other way. But guess what? Once I said that I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it with 1,000%. And I, at the end of it all, when I won, all I can do was shed tears of joy, because it was the community that came out and voted to get me to where I was. And I was just truly grateful. There were a lot of challenges that I had last summer into the campaign season. Too many to name right now, but many challenges. And there were many nights that I said, why am I doing this? Why? Like, please, somebody remind me, why am I doing this? This hurts. This is painful. I'm losing sleep. I'm barely seeing my child. I'm only putting him to bed and waking him up in the morning. Like, that's what's it. And that meant a lot in terms of like child development and everything. But just to kind of move along and think about, as I talked about the barrier around raising funds, this campaign season for the councilor race, we raised about $22,000, which was very impressive. And again, it was just tapping into other networks and really utilizing people to say, I need you to help me with making these calls. We got to tap into these folks. We need to look at these other lists, especially for the candidates who were not seeking re-election. Let's go through their list. Let's find who their high donors were, and we need to put them at the highest of our call list, prioritize them, and utilize folks like Marjorie Rep Decker, who was like, I will support you and I will send out mass blasts and emails and all this stuff and raise you some funds as well. And so those are the areas which it worked. And I'm really grateful to that. And to even say, I have a couple dollars left over in the bank to help, with just other miscellaneous things over these next 2 years, because our race is every 2 years. And I am able to say, like, I can hire a campaign manager off the bat next year and feel really comfortable with that. But it is important that it is a quality person, because I don't have the time and capacity to train a person to tell me what it is that I need to do. I can just do that myself. So, but Tami, there was one more thing, and I feel like I'm blanking on. There was another thing that you wanted me to touch on. Was it ranked choice?
Yeah, let's start to talk about ranked choice, because you've alluded to it like early on in the session, and then you just talked about it in terms of like number one and number two. And I think the reason why we want to focus on ranked choice a little bit here is, there are 28 states across the country that have at least one locality that has some form of ranked choice voting. It is something that can happen at the local level. It doesn't have to happen at the state level. And, ranked choice is one of those things that eliminates some of the polarization. It eliminates some of the, the sort of the mudslinging that we see between candidates because of this whole piece around the way that ranked choice voting works. I can explain it, but you've lived through it. So we'd love for you to explain a little bit what ranked choice voting is, what that experience was like, what it means to ask for someone's 1 and 2 vote. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So just a few minutes on this, and then we'll open it up to questions to the audience.
Great. And you know, Cambridge is very unique. Our rank choice is even different than what the real rank choice or what you might
Well,
know
that's
as
true.
rank
You have like probably what I would prefer to have, but yeah, it's very
So,
complicated, but it's
yeah,
exciting.
so for our race, you know, this race, we had 24 candidates run for 9 seats. Again, all candidates are at large, okay? And where you want people to vote, there's a lot of neighborhood groups that who do endorsements and different things like that. So they're going around and they're saying, you know, vote for any of these endorsed people, 1 through 5, or whatever their list of endorsees were, 1 through 6, 1 through 9. And you know, the important piece is aligning yourself with different people with different values or similar values on different issues. So housing issues, yes, there's a few folks that I'm aligned with on housing issues, and that's fabulous. But maybe when it comes to bike lanes, I'm more aligned with other people that are about, you know, I'm you know, more aligned with over here. So as I'm on these doors, and again, we had 3 individuals not seek re-election. So there was about, gosh, if my numbers serve me correctly, there was about 3,000 votes that were kind of out there to be available because their number one person was no longer running. And so you're trying to just tackle different people and also respectfully knowing that, hey, I'm super aligned with our former mayor, Sumbul Siddiqui, on many, many issues. I might pull some of her number ones, right? She topped the ticket with 4,300 number one votes. I might pull some of those and recognizing that your win number might be about 1,800, right? So that's a percentage of how many of the voters actually turn out to vote. So normally we have about 21,000 voters turn out. So maybe your win vote might be, say, 2,100, 10%, right? So you need about 10% of those votes to actually win. So you need about 2,100. So if Sumbul raised about 3,600 votes, she automatically hit quota early in the first round, which she did for the last number of terms. And so that means that her 2 3s and 4s and 5, whatever, they were able to drop down to the folks who got the 2s, like me. I benefited greatly, and other incumbents and other candidates as well. So you know, I got about 1,100 number one votes, and I was able to kind of maintain my position because of the 2s and 3s that I was able to get, not only from candidates who won, but from candidates who also didn't win. Okay, and so that's important to understand. So one quick example: a councilor, Paul Toner, who is wonderful. I really do like working with him, and we're aligned on some things. And in some areas we're not, but I do like him and we work very well. But he came in like, say, 5th place initially with his number one votes, right? But because and this was in last term, not this past election, but because he didn't align with many other people, he didn't get a lot of 2s and 3s. So when it all final count played out, he came in 8th place, right? Because he didn't get enough 2s and 3s to keep him high up on the list. In this past election, he was able to stay high, maintain that. He was probably in like 5th place again, somewhere around there. And he was able to maintain that because some of the other people who he aligned with who didn't win a seat, their 2s and 3s kind of went to him and he was able to stay in that spot. So it is a very helpful system, something that I think communities truly could benefit from. And it allows you to really think about making up kind of your council. So you could say, these are the people I would love to see on the council. I am going to rank them 1 through however many seats you have in that district. And that's something that I love. And some people take that ballot and they only vote for one person. Another person may say, well, I like 2 of y'all. I just want to rank you both number 1. Well, now your ballot is voided. And that doesn't count, right? So you really have to think wise and think clearly about who is your number one person? Who is the person that you truly want to see on the council? And that is the person that you give your number 1 to. The number 2s and the 3s and going down the list are the people who you also would like to see on, right? But you want to make sure that your number 1 goes to the person that you want to see there. And that's really important. And it really goes back to just equity around voting and making sure that your vote just kind of doesn't get wasted when you vote for more than one person too. So I love the fact that cities are doing it. I love that Cambridge does it. I think we need to do more education around what that looks like across our communities, especially our immigrant communities where English is not their first language, or in areas where they've never even voted before, right? So like folks come to the voting poll and they're like, I don't even know what to do, right? Maybe they came with a list, maybe they didn't. But it's important that we are utilizing even our election commissions to make sure that folks are well informed about how to vote. I can't tell you the number of people that I had to, educate along the campaign trail, those who maybe even had their mail-in ballots and was like, can you help me figure this out? Can you, I don't know what to do. And that was felt very problematic. And I'm grateful to those doors that I knocked for individuals who asked for that help, because if I didn't knock that door on that day in particular, what might their support have been and what might their ballot look like? So, I think I'm really pushing on our election commission to do a better job of educating, because education around especially a complex, we're not just talking about one or two people that you get to vote for. You really have to go down a list. Sometimes you need a second sheet of paper so that you line and bullet. If anybody ever played the lottery, you got to like circle this dot and do all this stuff. But if you're going across a line, it could be very challenging, and you may actually put a tally mark on the same number for two different people, which means that now your ballot is now not able to be utilized. So it's very complex, but it's a beautiful thing, and it can get folks in. Hey, buddy, we have a friend with us.
I love having a visitor. And one of the things that I understand is that, you alluded to this also, that, ranked choice voting really brings forward more candidates, more diverse candidates. And in places that have ranked choice voting, that we have seen, large, like a whole city council comprised of women and women of color in particular, right? So it is about equalizing and building equity from a structural perspective on how your vote matters. So you might not, your number one might not be the person who's actually going to win in that particular race, but you can live with your second or your third choice. And so it just gives you that option, like you said, where your vote is not wasted. We are at the point where we want to turn it over to Vanessa and Emily to each ask one question that has come up in the chat. So I'll turn it over to Emily Lamunu, who is a doctoral student at the BU School of Social Work, and Vanessa Navarro, who's an MSW student at the BU School of Social Work, to put a couple questions to you. I think we'll have time just for two, and then we'll turn it over to wrapping up. So Emily or Vanessa, I'm not sure which of you is going first.
I'm going to be going first. First of all, thank you guys so much. This was such an interesting conversation. I always say that we need more social workers in like political power places. So it's just awesome to hear. So the one question that we had was about imposter syndrome. So did you guys feel any when you were in the campaign, or if you were in your government positions? Because my thing is, like, how hard of a pivot was it from being a social worker to dealing with other politicians? Is there any imposter syndrome that comes with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I have not experienced that, and I say that cautiously because I'm not quite sure what it is. I guess it's sort of the sense, right, that like you don't belong where you are, or you're playing a part that's not really you or meant for you. I guess it's in part because how I was raised, that I was raised by a social worker. I was raised an activist, and my dad was also, so my mom's a social worker, and my dad was this very thoughtful, deliberative person. But they both, I think, instilled in me this sense that like it is our obligation to do good in the world, and to, like I said earlier, to kind of pick up that mirror and say, why not me? And in fact, if I don't, like, maybe no one else will, and then things will always stay the same and nothing will change and it won't become a better society, because everybody's going to be looking for somebody else to do it. So I was raised, I think, with this really intrinsic sort of sense of responsibility, that I had, opportunities as a child, and those don't just come kind of like for free. You don't just like you have to be thinking about society, and you have to part of it is based in our faith too. I think the Jewish tradition is steeped in issues of social justice and in thinking about how do we do tikkun olam, which is to make the world better. And I have tried to live that as best I could throughout my experience and running for office and in my job at NASW, and kind of always trying to keep that at the forefront of everything that I did or do. I will say that moment when the votes were tallied and I had won that election that I really shouldn't have won based on the demographics and the situation, and I had this overwhelming feeling of like, awe is the word I can use to describe it. Like, oh my God, I won. Like, we won, and all these people believed in me, or they trusted me. They trusted that I was gonna represent them. And I definitely had that feeling of being kind of blown away, and feeling very humbled and very honored to serve. And then there were times when, both during the campaign and later when I sat in the seat, where it was very hard. It was very, very hard. And at first I thought I'd go to the Board of Aldermen and I just gotten elected on this wave of like people so excited and everyone there is going to like me. And that was not the case. When I arrived, like the other aldermen were not interested in what I was about. So it was hard, very hard at times. But I think just trying to get along with people, trying to work with people, trying to see people compassionately and as humans and as people with ideas that maybe I could learn from, we could learn from each other, I think helped me to have any of the success that I experienced on the Board of Aldermen. And also recognizing that it wasn't about me, and that if I had an idea, maybe I could give it to someone else and they might have better luck pushing it forward than I would, just based on what I was, and that worked on a couple of occasions. So
Coalition building for sure.
yes. So
yeah, we're gonna put Emily, if you could put the last question to Councilor Wilson, because we're pretty much at time, that would be wonderful. And then we'll turn it over to Diane for closing.
Sure.
Thank you.
From your experience, what have been the most rewarding and the most challenging aspects of working to implement ranked choice voting?
Thank you so much for that question, Emily. And I would say what has been a rewarding, first and foremost, is just being able to serve in the community that raised me, right? Like, this is my city, and I am really privileged and honored to have so many folks who voted for me, who continue to support me and follow my journey and want to continue to uplift the work that I'm doing, have done, and look forward to doing. And so that really keeps me feeling great and being in this seat and being in this role. And, again, we do have tough issues in Cambridge. And as I just said, on Monday night, we had 300 people who reached out and who spoke and testified in public comment. Our meeting did not end until after midnight, right? And we were having a conversation literally about our bike lanes in our city. And this is a very heated conversation and divisive conversation. And, the fact that, the decision that I make around how do we continue to look at our infrastructure around safety, but also centering voices that are not often at the table, who was not a part of the 300, right? And who came to testify in public comment, those constituents matter too. Those voices matter as well. And I needed to also be there and center them. So those are hard and difficult conversations. And no doubt Tuesday morning and still ongoing, I'm getting disappointed. I'm disappointed in you emails, and that's okay. Yep, you will be disappointed in a decision or two that I make. But I hope that you see the better in me and like the good in me, and understand that there will be decisions that I make that you're going to be really happy about, right? And that it's not going to be always a win-win. Sometimes we do have to, think about what that compromise looks like and how do we get to 50-50 or, 80-20 or whatever that case is. And this is where it goes back to the ranked choice. Like there are people who I'm aligned with on the bike lanes who maybe are not aligned with on the housing stuff, right? Affordable housing, true affordable housing in our city. So, I think I pulled on some of those votes and I pulled on some of these votes. That really is what got me into this seat. And I'm really grateful to our community for understanding the various complexities around decisions that have to get made, and where that lies with council, like how at the local level of government, the decisions that get to be made based on someone's interest, right? But as a social worker, I think holistically, I'm thinking community wide. What are the things that we need in our community to make sure that we all thrive, not looking at just one population, but looking at all populations. And that's where I'm not going to ever lose my vision or lose myself in the work. So even as we talk about imposter syndrome, it's like, there definitely could be moments where I can lose myself and fall victim to the loudest voices or whatever the case is. But I have to be true to myself and true to this work and why I decided to take this launch into running for council. And that's to be true to my community, the voices of the most marginalized who don't get that representation that they need. And sometimes that's not going to be the voices that you hear often. And it's important that I'm here to help elevate those voices.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious to those of us who listened to you both and had this conversation for the last hour plus, just why we wanted you here. It's been a real honor and a privilege. So I thank both Rebekah and Councilor Wilson for your time, but also your dedication to building a more just world in how we talk to each other, how we think about other people we might not agree with on every single issue or every single topic, but really finding and valuing and honoring the dignity and the humanity in every single person in our community. So I appreciate just how you've always led in those ways and that you talked about those issues here because they are so central to our work. So thank you so much. Thank you, Emily and Vanessa, for asking those questions. I'm going to turn it over to Diane now to close us out. And
Thank you, Tami, and thank you so much for this wonderful conversation this evening. I've really enjoyed it. I learned so much, and it was so exciting to hear from both of you about the wonderful experiences you've had in elected office and campaigns, and it was just wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. You'll see on the screen now there's QR codes that you can share your feedback with us, and if you're if you're asking for CEs for the event, please also scan the QR code to take the quiz. And then there are a number of resources that are going to be put in the chat fairly soon, if not already, that have information for you about NASW, about ranked choice voting, and other resources and information. And I just want to close with letting you know that the recording for this will be on the Center for Innovation, Social Work, and Health's website fairly soon. So please check for that. And thank you so much for joining us this evening, and have a wonderful evening.